I'm starting just because it's time. So just so we start on time, you guys can do your, you know, have your admin chat. That's fine. Emily, do you want to be? Oh, Emily is muted. Okay, so she's muted.
Yeah, I can mute myself. And
yeah.
Can you see me?
Nope.
Okay.
Can you hear my child screaming?
All right, well, let's get started. Gab's going to kick it off.
All right, we're all ready?
Yes.
Ready to start. Good morning. Lovely day out there. Hope it is wherever you are as well. I'm Gabrielle Belfit, and I'm going to host today's workshop along with Rebecca Cheney, Westford Town Planner and the Municipal Lead on the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Project. This is the last in a series of 4 workshops that we have been holding every Thursday morning, looking at ways to protect the most important community assets identified within the town of Westford. And the way the workshops work is we engage the stakeholders, the people who are participating on the call today, to come up with ideas and strategies to address community vulnerabilities and create a more resilient future for Westford. Everything okay? Before the COVID pandemic, the workshop would have been held as an all-day in-person workshop, but as you know, with the social distancing and ban on meetings, we've had to resort to doing this virtual public engagement process. We think it's working pretty well and appreciate your patience with having to use a virtual platform instead of the more personal in-person meeting. There is a lot of information about the project on the town's MVP website. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. There's a pre-video about climate change projections and very important survey is on that website as well. If you haven't been to the website, we would very much appreciate if you can go online when it's convenient for you in the next few days, actually, and add your thoughts. So we are focusing today on environmental assets within Westford. The agenda is very similar to the weeks past. We'll be alternating a series of short presentations with a group discussion. So the comments are using the GoToMeeting features. And are we doing Q&A written or both Q&A written and verbal? Jenny? Yes, both Q&A. It's both written and verbal.
Yep, that's right. Rebecca runs that, and there's a way for folks to both raise their hands as well as folks from the core team can unmute themselves and chime in. So Rebecca runs that. Sorry, my audio is a little challenging. I'm trying to figure out how to call in. Sorry.
Okay, you sound great. Our main presenter is Jenny Moonen, who you just heard. And I'm just going to turn this over to Rebecca for a few introductory remarks about why we're doing this project.
Hello, everyone. I think most of you have heard me give my little spiel before, but so if you don't know, last summer the town received a grant from the state to develop a municipal vulnerability preparedness plan and to update our hazard mitigation plan. And so we've been working with a consultant tie-in bond and a core team of municipal staff over the last 7 months to complete the plans. By completing the plans, we will provide more opportunities to get funding for emergency preparedness and to prepare for more frequent and more intense storm events related to climate change. So I just want to say a thank you to all of the core team who's participated throughout this process. It has been intensive at times, and it's greatly appreciated. And I will turn it over to Jenny, and you can take it away. Jenny, can you hear us?
Sorry, I just had to call in. The audio was very poor on my end and I couldn't hear what people were saying, so Sorry.
That's okay. Just want to make sure you,
Where are we?
I just passed it over to you.
Oh, good. Thank you,
Yeah.
Rebecca. Thanks for the patience on the glitches with the technology.
It's okay.
So hopefully everyone can hear me fine. You all hopefully have seen the website that Rebecca mentioned. We're working on updates ongoing. So right now there's videos from the previous sessions for those of you who watched them, or for folks who couldn't participate but did want to participate, and links to the survey as well as an intro video. So check it out if you haven't, or share it with folks who've reached out to you. And with that, let's get going. So we are going to jump in and talk about natural hazards. I think many of you on this have seen these slides before, so I am going to keep this presentation moving rather quickly. And I do need to explain what natural hazards are, though, for anyone who hasn't been on this call. So natural hazards are any natural that threatens lives, property, or other assets. They typically can be predicted, and they often occur repeatedly in the same geographic locations because they're related to weather patterns or physical characteristics of an area. And we all have been experiencing this pandemic and its impacts, but is not a natural hazard under FEMA's program. The slide that you're looking at shows the natural hazards defined by the state plan. So there's a 2019 State Hazard Mitigation and Climate Adaptation Plan, and the three that are crossed out don't apply to Westford because those typically affect inland coastal communities, excuse me. And there's a bunch of information about the details on frequency, duration, and impact in a number of sources, including the 2015 Hazard Mitigation Plan that was prepared for Westford and other communities by NIMCOG, as well as the Massachusetts climate change projections that EEA has put out for consistency in the MVP planning process, along with that state regional plan. So there's a lot more detail on these and a bunch of references that will be pulled into the hazard mitigation plan we're working on. And we had asked you guys to take a survey. As of today, we have 16 respondents, and there was, based on that input, these are the top natural hazard risks in Westford for past and present. So thunderstorms, invasive species, high wind, and nor'easters. And as we've gotten more responses, this order hasn't changed. It's actually been strengthened. And based on the pre-survey input, future hazards that folks are concerned about and think will occur more frequently or more extensively include invasive species, extreme temperature, and drought. So it's tied technically two hazards. Ice storms, and now we have a four-way tie for fourth place: hurricanes, tropical storms, thunderstorms, and high wind. When you couple these natural hazards with climate change, we also had worked with the core team at the beginning of this process to do a mathematical exercise thinking about probability, frequency, geographic extent, and severity of impact. And so when we combine that with the public input, the box on the left here shows the top 4 natural hazards that are affecting Westford. So generally severe storms, high wind, both drought and extreme temperatures, and invasive species. And when you couple that with climate change, risks will be amplified. And normally in this presentation, we would spend, if we were in person, we would have a whole section on the climate change projections and how they affect Westford. However, due to the time with the online process, we did a video that's recorded that talks about the state's consistent standards and information and how it would affect Westford. So I'm encouraging people to just check that out. It's pretty short. So as you guys know, climate change can affect infrastructure, things like thinking about drinking water supplies or town facilities located in floodplains or critical access routes across water bodies for emergency response. Climate change is going to affect public health, thinking about things like maybe increased number of hot days where vulnerable populations need cooling. We all know how hazards impact our businesses and economies. It can be significant. And with this session, thinking about natural resources and Westford's environment are susceptible to these hazards. Some examples are invasive species taking over natural habitat or space for appropriate plants to be, flooding and stormwater runoff, contributing pollutants to water bodies and wetlands, drought killing off vernal pools, things like that. Incorporating climate change into the local planning through the MVP process helps communities prepare for these conditions. Many of you have seen this slide before. I am compelled to explain that FEMA defines a community asset as anything that is important to the character and function of a community. These are typically organized into 4 categories, and we've had sessions on societal and infrastructure assets, and we ended up deciding to move to an online process for the economy session just due to lack of participation in the virtual meeting. Today, we're going to be spending a good chunk of our time talking about all the important natural resource assets in Westford. This category is meant to capture resources important to Westford's character, Westford's economy, thinking about recreation, tourism, protection of clean air and water, and ecosystems such as wetlands providing flood storage. So with that, we are going to move on to a matrix where we talk about the specific list of community assets and their strengths and vulnerabilities. I'm going to just switch to the Excel. Thank you for your patience while I do this. Can everyone still hear me all right? Hopefully.
I can hear you.
Yep.
Oh, good. Thank you. Just checking. So I'm going to just zoom this in a bit. What this is the state spreadsheet and matrix that we fill out as part of the community resilience building process. So every community that goes through this fills out the same spreadsheet, and there's sort of steps to it. So we're going to start with the first step, which is looking at the inventory of natural environmental assets that came from the survey. So we didn't modify these, even though we know a lot of other assets in Westford. We wanted to stick to the survey. Their location if it's necessary, and ownership if we need to note it, and then talk about vulnerabilities and strengths. And I didn't pre-populate vulnerabilities and strengths this time because we got a lot of good discussion in other communities around that. So we're gonna actually open it up to you guys. So with that, I think Rebecca, you're gonna help facilitate the questions and answers. Gab's gonna jump in, and I'm gonna type into this, and we'll go from there. So I'm asking first step for folks in attendance, if you look at this list, please let me know if you have additions. This is what I want to talk about specifically.
So one quick question, this is Ray. A strength, would that be beach testing? Or am I off base? For like beach testing, we have 14 beaches in Westford that we test for once a week in the summer. I don't know if that's a strength for the natural environment.
Yeah, I think that would be a strength, that you monitor the water quality with beach testing. So people know that the water is
Safe to swim in.
safe to swim in. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Because I'm on my phone.
You're a little bit soft, Jenny.
Carol.
Oh, Carol.
Carol.
I guess I wanted to add that we have a open space and recreation plan that's been approved by EOEA, at least conditionally.
I did not hear that. Jenny, did you get that?
No, Carol, do you mind trying again, or do you want to type it into the? What I'm seeing questions. Great. Are we still trying to have Carol get her her comment in? Oh, great. Oh, okay. The open space and recreation plan. Yep, that's absolutely a strength, and that would apply to a number of these assets. So I'm going to put it under open space all, and we'll apply it afterwards because it does. Okay. Thank you, Carol.
Jenny, I have a question from Carol Morse also, or a comment.
Great.
I'm going to unmute her. Okay, Carol, go ahead.
Oh, okay. The East Boston Camps is no longer keeping that name. It is now called the Stony Brook. You might just want to, and I think it's Stony Brook Conservation Land, but the last time I walked there, I noticed that there was no longer an East Boston Camp sign.
We'll have to confirm that with you, Jenny Polster, town engineer. I know there was a significant amount of back and forth, including toe-to-toe discussions at town meeting. And I recall that they decided to call it the Stony Brook Conservation Land, but that the camp was still going to be called East Boston Camp. But I think there's documentation out there for that. We'll have to narrow that down, Carol.
Thank you.
Carol chatted in and said the EBC is part of Stony Brook Conservation Land. So
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts about strengths and vulnerabilities that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, it's the strengths. I mean, it is really a well used place. People of all ages walking there, and you know, it's just a wonderful asset resource in our town.
Wonderful, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jenny, what would be an example of a vulnerability?
For this site specifically, or for any of these?
For any of them. I'm just trying to think of.
Well, sure. One that comes up for water bodies and wetlands, so this would apply to all the specific locations, is polluted stormwater runoff entering these water bodies and causing water quality impacts and spreading pollution. So that's an example of a vulnerability. And the way you would have a mitigation action for that is to do planning around it or structural controls to help reduce both volume and pollutant loading. Does that help kind of explain the sequence?
Yes, thank you.
Another vulnerability that would impact a lot of open spaces is dumping, trash, invasive species. Also concern, can be a vulnerability.
Okay, thank you.
Erosion from too much walking.
Ray, do you have any thoughts on, in terms of vulnerability, in terms of like invasive water plants that are in any of our lakes and ponds?
Yeah, that's the reason I asked, because, with the Healthy Lakes and Ponds Collaborative, we do find lots of invasive plants that we're actually in the middle of a survey for all of our lakes and ponds. I'm sure Carol can chime in as well. And we contract out for treatment plans each year. We do have situations where we have runoff. We have, use of boats, pesticides, all kinds of issues that affect the water bodies. So I don't know if Carol maybe has more to say on that. Those are some of the issues we deal with all the time with the ponds. Algal blooms.
10:28, let's see. Carol is writing in, so, all right, I'm just gonna read some of the comments.
Great, thanks, Rebecca.
From Carol. So she has wetland bylaws is a strength, the wetland bylaw, the local. I don't know if you got that one already. We have erosion on some properties. Terrestrial and aquatic issues with invasive plants, she writes. And then, sorry, she can't speak. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to get her on the phone, because I think she's gonna have a lot of input here, and it will probably be more efficient for her to talk.
Yeah, the call-in worked well for me, Rebecca, to continue the presentation and then call. there's a place, Carol, if you're listening, on the dashboard, I think, that can give you the call-in number while you're still in the session. I think that's right. It says like audio, and then you can pick computer.
Jenny, one thing too. Oops, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention where you have trails. I know Carol will pipe in for that too. I know the Westford Healthy Committee, they work really hard to keep those trails clean, and we have trail maps. We have quite a few trails in town.
Yes. And the Conservation Trust also has quite good mapping, I thought, and supports that as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, I have some comments and some questions. Let's see here. All right, I have Susan Thomas. Susan?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I was just typing in a bunch of vulnerabilities for aquifers. I think some of them have been mentioned in the meantime. Invasive species, periodic low water flow, followed by flooding water flow, perchlorate, pesticides and fertilizers, erosion, particularly new erosion because of new building, which removes buffer land and plant life around bodies of water. I'm specifically thinking about the Juniper Hill development, where part of the esker was removed, but there are probably other places where building is happening that's removing sort of those buffers, natural buffers around our bodies of water. With regard to trails, well, one of the strengths is the stormwater that we're putting in place with regard to water, and also Radix work with landowners to keep our bodies of water healthy. And then I mentioned that I think dogs are a risk to our conservation land. We have some overuse of some of our trails by walkers, which is a great thing, but we also have that overuse is also happening with dogs. And I've heard residents talk as if the land belongs to the dogs. And it's my view that the dogs and the people are visiting the residents of the land. So I kind of take the flip perspective of it, that the people who are there are the guests, and the dogs and the residents see it the other way often. So I do think we have an issue there, where the residents see the natural wildlife in some of our conservation land as a hazard rather than as an asset, and as something that shouldn't be irritating them. And then I started to say, when you brought up trails, that we have strong volunteer resources in town that maintain our town trails. There's a trail maintenance group through the Conservation Trust, and the Scouts are often involved in maintaining or building new trails in town through their conservation efforts. And there are probably other groups that I'm not aware of that do that. And I think our townspeople under our current emergency are becoming more and more acquainted with our trails, and they have great resources for finding them through the maps that have been developed by those volunteer organizations.
We do, Jenny, Polstera, town engineer. We have a Healthy Westford committee that has a subcommittee for walking Westford. It's Don Gaylor and Bill Harmon and some other people on the pedestrian safety committee that, you know, have a whole plan for making Westford walkable.
Great, thanks, Paul.
Jenny, I have a couple comments to read.
Great.
If you're ready. So these are from Emily Teller, a resident. So she says, our bylaws are strong, but our zoning bylaw committee isn't always strong to not grant variances / waivers. And then the next comment from Emily is Westford trails are really significant in Westford, and I would guess that we have more as a percentage of our land area than most towns. Our Conservation Trust and Conservation Commission requires new development to create trails, and if possible, link them to ones we have. There is a weekly group all year that goes out and works to keep the trails clear of down trees, brush, etc.
That's great. Trying to capture all of that. Was it chatted into the questions section?
Yep.
I'm just trying to copy it.
Okay.
Oh, good. Great.
Rebecca, can you hear me now? It's Carol.
Yes. Hi, Carol.
Oh, good. Okay.
And Jenny, when you're ready, I have another one to read from
Okay,
Emily.
hold on. I didn't all of the trails. Okay. Let's go. I'm going to just have to address that afterwards. Thanks.
Okay. Yep. So just so everyone hears, I guess for people who are on the phone who might not have access to this. So Emily Teller writes about tree cover. We don't have an active tree planting program. National Grid cut down 1,000 trees along the roadways this past year with plans for 1,000 more. Many of these trees were very old and provided much tree cover. Even if replaced, it would take decades or equivalent shade. There's a grant in process for some minimal trees that the wonderful Westford Highway Department will replant, but not along the roadways as far as I know. And then the final comment, or the latest comment from Emily, is trails. Also, bridges in town conservation land are built often by Eagle Scouts. So I think she's just reiterating that participation of Eagle Scouts in various activities.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
I guess I would just say Scouts in general, because we do have other Scout groups, both girls and other younger ones than just Eagles, who do work.
Sure. Okay. I did say Scouts often maintain or build new trails, and I'll just say and bridges. There we go. Okay. We're getting to 11 here. Let's pick a few more pick something that strikes you that you want to provide some input on, and we'll do a last few here, and then we'll move on and get going. Oh no, I'm sorry. We still have a whole nother hour. Let's spend a little bit more time on this. Sorry about that. Time slips through fingers like sand right now.
I think we're all in the same boat on that one, Jenny.
So yeah, let's keep going. If folks can kind of look at this list and think about something that strikes you that you want to talk about. We've got a lot of good stuff on open space, on the trails for sure.
I guess I have a question, and I don't know if there's someone else in the core team or on the phone who has any insight on it, but about impact to aquifers, like upstream development on aquifers, and what kind of impacts that may have on water supply to Westford, and where we are in the aquifer, upstream or downstream. But it seems to me that, as development increases and time goes on, that aquifers will become impacted negatively. And that I may be wrong about that, but it's just my perception.
So a good thing on there is awareness, watershed awareness, and public education that you can do for residents in regard to chemical use, not dumping anything on the lawns or through their septic systems that could make its way into groundwater. So those are mitigation strategies that are, I think pertinent.
Rebecca, it's Carol. Another subgroup of the Healthy Westford Committee is an environmental committee, and we did just talk about adding some links for healthy lawns to our website to try to do some further education.
Okay. I have oh, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, I'm noticing that Mark Warren, our environmental officer down at the water department's not on the call. Was he invited, or he's actually a key person for this call?
Yeah, he's been invited to all of the workshops. He hasn't participated yet, but you're right, Paul. So
Okay.
maybe for anybody that you think of along those lines that you want to have involved, we can, and maybe, I don't know, Jenny, if you're going to talk about this at all at the end, but the next step is the listening session, which is where we'll have the draft MVP report, which we can share with folks. And if there are comments or additions or whatnot, people will have an opportunity to comment before it's finalized. So that's something that could go to Mark if he wanted to.
Yeah,
have
there's a bunch of questions that have come in through some of the comments on the survey that I wanted to share with the core team because I didn't have answers to them. And there's a few questions that have come out of these workshops. So they'll be sort of a core team action item before the listening session to try to resolve some of these outstanding items. So I just italicized it and we'll follow up with Mark.
Okay. And I do have a question. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I could add one thing that I know Mark's been working on because it's coming before the Conservation Commission, but they've been working on a Stony Brook restoration where they would be working to keep water inflow, so that, especially going forward with drought conditions and concerns, that there's a way of measuring the water levels and keeping that inflow.
Okay, thank you. And this is something that has come through the sort of been worked on piecemeal with the water department, and it's something we try to add into our planning board decisions, which is use of fertilizers or reduced use of fertilizers and de-icers and that kind of stuff. So it's part of their public education on the water department's website, and it's sort of languished for a while. I think it could use some updating.
I would add that the Conservation Commission typically has those kinds of requirements in their permits as well. And along those lines of the permitting part, we do usually require for any restoration, whether it's buffer zone or, obviously in the wetlands, but we're looking at native plant restoration. And, Rebecca and I have been talking about that as well, and hoping maybe planning board can incorporate more native plants. Also, they help out compete the invasive.
Hold on one sec, let me catch up. Some of these are mitigation actions, so I'm going into that category, if that makes sense to everyone.
Yep.
Okay. Can I add another one while it's on my mind, Jenny? It's Carol.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, the water department, a lot of our management of fields is done by water during the summertime, or maybe Parks and Rec. It's kind of a combination of efforts, highway, water, and park. Anyway, they have started one of the old landfill. They are now mowing later. They had been mowing it during the pollinating season, and we requested that they postpone that mowing, so that now we're encouraging that to be open for pollination.
Oh, that's a great one.
Hi, Jenny. It's Matt Salem.
Oh, sorry, Matt. I was just, don't let me forget, I was going to mention forest management as well. We've been working on.
Forest management. Okay, one sec. Let me put these in the right spaces because there was actually a playing fields category. So I'll put that there. And then you said the forest management.
It wasn't a playing field. It's an open field. It was the old dump, but it's now just a capped area. And instead of just mowing it down to grass, it's been let go to native pollination.
All right, so this doesn't really fit there. I'll find somewhere to put that. Okay.
Jenny, I have some questions from the audience when you're ready.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, Susan? Susan Thomas, are you there?
Oh, I am. Sorry.
That's okay.
You wanted me to speak out. All right.
Well, you had your hand raised, so if you have a comment or a question, now's your chance. If not, you can.
I'm sorry. I was typing them into the comments, so
Oh, okay.
if I didn't mean to have my hand raised, I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. Here, it's okay. All right, I'm going to go to Carol. Carol Morse.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good. I typed in a couple comments, but I don't think you saw them. At any rate, the one that I'd like to speak to is when you were talking about the use of chemicals. I'm very, very concerned about lawn chemicals, agricultural chemicals, and our groundwater and wells. This is something that it sounds like maybe there is an education program through the water department, which I'll have to check out. But you know, that's a concern.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Just shuffling stuff in the right spots. Okay. Did somebody else try to speak? And then Carol was kind of wrapping up her thoughts. I can't.
Yes,
I think that was Matt Salem.
Yeah,
Matt.
so I was just waiting for everything to calm down. Regarding floodplain, last year, the FEMA firm maps are in the process of being updated for basically everything north of 495, that drainage basin that goes to the Merrimack. Those are anticipated to get probably reviewed and need to be approved in the next probably year to 18 months. And additionally, just in terms of wetlands, I think a vulnerability is there seems to be a high preponderance of beavers and beaver dams within the town, specifically at pond outlets and culverts that I definitely think is either a threat or a vulnerability.
Yeah, that's a great one. We've certainly seen that in site visits, and I know Paul and Jeremy run into that a lot.
Jenny, I have a lot of comments in the question, in the question panel. So I don't know if you want me to read them all or if you want to just go back and have them as a reference.
It's nice to read them because it helps people think about what's being input into the discussion and might spurn some additional discussion. So I think we should try to read them. Dab,
Okay.
how are we with? I think we typically try to move on to mitigation actions in probably about another 10 minutes or so. So
Yeah, we're doing okay with time.
Okay, let's read.
Okay, so I'm going to just read through what I have so far. So this,
Great.
and they kind of go back and forth between a handful of people. So I'm just going to read them as they came in. So the first one is from Susan Thomas, and she writes, the Forest Committee. I believe their focus is financial, not conservation or preservation or carbon sequestration. So she's not sure if that makes it a vulnerability or a strength, if that makes sense. It exists, but its focus is, it sounds like it's financial, not conservation or preservation.
I think you should get further clarification on that, Jenny. I mean, Rebecca, because I'm not sure that that's completely accurate. I mean, they have been, doing maintenance kind of work. I think that's improvement to the forest conditions.
Yep. Okay. The next is from Emily Teller. Thank goodness for vernal pools. The state and local regs are the only saving barrier for development, not to encroach on the area around these. Are you ready for the next?
Yep, trying.
Okay, just tell me when you're ready and I'll move on.
I'm ready. You
I
can
don't
talk
want
to.
Okay.
Yep, we're good.
Next is from Susan Thomas. We should be planning and managing as a watershed, both for water, but also with regard to wildlife corridors and conservation.
Okay, let me put that in. We had watersheds in here somewhere. Oh, it was just the Stony Brook watershed, but it will apply to all watersheds. So that would be a vulnerability. So thinking about watershed planning, and can you just reread that again?
Yep, we should be planning and managing as a watershed. So maybe that's a mitigation.
Great.
Both, and then she writes both for water, but also with regard to wildlife corridors and conservation.
Okay.
Jenny, there was a little typo that scrolled past. I happened to catch Keys. It's Keys Pond. We don't have any lakes well, yeah, we don't have any lakes in town. We have a pond, only ponds.
You don't call Nab Lake a lake?
Only Jody does. But in USGS, it is a pond, and in all of our maps, it's a pond. But when our town manager moved on to it, it became a lake. It is a pond on the USGS maps and on the town's maps. But you notice I only mentioned Keys. I didn't mention Nab.
What else do we have, Rebecca? Let me just hit save on this, just in case.
Okay. I have a comment from Susan Thomas. She writes that the Sustainable Westford group brought in an organic lawn expert a number of years ago, and she's going to look for the name. And then I have a comment from Emily Teller. I think Emmett Lands is what she means.
Oh, that mentioned. Yep.
So she writes, during the COVID-19 period, these are being used for walking in the woods to a greater degree than usual, especially the trails at the end of Texas Road and Trails End, which also abut town-owned and conservation land. She's seen young dirt bikers there, despite signs saying no motor vehicles. There's a pond in the middle of the land, Neshoba Pond, which is very accessible. It's a fantastic wild resource in Westford. That sounds like a mix of vulnerabilities and strength.
I would agree with that. And Rebecca, we can capture all of the comments right after the recording's over, right? It gets documented to us.
Okay.
I think so. We can just make sure we.
Let's see.
Correctly. I can't see the questions easily the way it's presenting on my screen. So thanks for reading them.
Yep. All right, and the next, I think we've covered Susan Thomas's. Oh, Susan Thomas writes, she believes that the rec department was trying to use organic methods on the common. And then I have another one.
Okay.
I have another one from Emily Teller. She writes, landfill area mowing. There could be meadowlarks nesting there, and timing is crucial for mowing. I would say that's true at a number of places around town for nesting and pollinators and all of that.
Great. That does seems like a vulnerability, but also goes with the strength of the town starting to change practices and timing.
Right, and mitigation if we could come up with a strategy working with some departments on mowing schedules.
Of course, my neighbor just started his yard work up. Is everyone hearing the leaf blower or?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, good. Just checking. You can close the door.
I think I have a question from the audience again.
Okay.
Carol Morse, do you have something to add?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. Your hand was up. That's all.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Okay. Okay, I think that's it for now, Jenny.
All right, well, we're at 11:20. I think we should move on to mitigation actions. And if things come up that apply to these first three categories, we'll go from there. I think because most of you have been on these sessions, I'm not going to switch back to the PowerPoint just to be sensitive to time. The next thing that we do in this workshop is talk about specific actions to address the vulnerabilities and strengths and protect the strengths that we just discussed. So,
hey, Jen, this is Chip.
Oh, hey, Chip, you missed your chance on the Matrix, I guess. No, go ahead.
That's fine with me. I've got like 5 or 10 minutes I can spend with you before I need to leave. I didn't know if there was something that you needed me for up to this point. I'd be more than happy to spend a few minutes, but it's crazy.
Understood. Chip, go ahead. One question that came up was about the Forest Committee. Does the Forest Committee have plans beyond just making sort of financial decisions when they do their forest management program? Are they looking at all at vulnerabilities and looking at, sequestration or invasive species and all those kinds of things?
When you do the forest management plan, the idea is to take in all those things into account. Is the committee doing anything? Not really. It's too much to do and not enough time and not enough assets. If you wanted to do everything you're supposed to do or everything everybody creates for you to do. But when we do the forest management plan, there is no money that's put towards anything in it other than what we get out of the benefit of thinning the forest. And if thinning the forest is going to help with the invasive species, like it did or was supposed to in both the last forest jobs we did, then that's the benefit of doing that thinning. Is that your question?
Yeah, there had been a question earlier. Somebody was wondering whether the decisions were based sort of purely financial or whether there was other thoughts that went into the decision making on the forest management.
Oh no, it's 100% forest management. The financial part of it is that we'll only do the forest management if the management of the forest covers the cost of doing that. At the end of the day, there may be $900 or $1,000 that go into a revolving fund for forest management, and I think there's only $900 in it now. So there's not a lot of money that is made from this. There is no money that's basically made from it at all.
Okay.
Jen, I have a comment when you have a second.
Sure.
Or when you're ready. So this is from Susan Thomas. She writes, all of our conservation lands have challenges with adjacent landowners and visitors using public lands as if they were private. Skateboard park set up in Stone Arch Bridge Bird Sanctuary, permanent camping set up on island and pond in Emmett Land, yard waste dumped, other landscaping encroachment in borders.
Okay, that's great. That expands on one of the comments that was made previously. So thank you.
Okay.
So can I add sort of a mitigation measure then? The Conservation Commission does have a subcommittee that's been looking at its borders and boundaries and talking about boundary marking. It's been a little derailed as COVID came upon us, but that was a subcommittee that's been at work since probably last fall, late fall.
Great. Okay. I guess Chip, since you joined, we just had gone through the whole list of assets, and then folks had spent some time talking about vulnerabilities and strengths. So we're going to move on to mitigation actions, and I was just going to re-explain to everyone on the call what mitigation actions consist of, so that you can put this back in your mind. For those of you who have been on these presentations before, and for those who haven't, you will have a better understanding. There's hazard mitigation means permanently reducing or alleviating loss of life, injury, and property resulting from natural hazards through long-term strategies. And these are typically organized into 6 categories. Prevention, which is things like changes to planning, zoning, building codes, or doing capital improvement planning. Protecting property, so that would be acquisition, elevation, relocation, or structural retrofits that typically applies to buildings and facilities. Educating the public and making them aware. Protecting natural resources and implementing green infrastructure. So this is things like managing the watershed, restoring wetlands and stream corridors, controlling erosion and sediment runoff, installing low impact development measures to improve water quality and reduce stormwater runoff, completing structural projects, any kind of physical, actual work. And then the last one is protecting emergency services. So that would be early warning systems capabilities and response infrastructure, which doesn't typically apply to this category pretty significantly. So those are the categories. And the last thing I do want to mention is EEA's program is very, very focused on nature-based solutions. So these are things thinking about open space preservation, ecosystem restoration, and low impact development, like conserve, integrate, and restore. And taking actions like this provide co-benefits, avoiding cost, enhancing safety, and providing environmental awareness. And some of the hazards that specifically can be addressed with nature-based solutions include flooding, stormwater, and heat island effects. So increased heat. So that's, just keep those in mind as we move forward and talk about specific actions. So I'm going to hide a few of these columns just so we can all see, hopefully you still see the matrix. We're going to be thinking now about what actions can the town or even private entities, we don't have to exclude private in this because it is supposed to be a stakeholder process. What actions can the community take to address nor'easters and extreme storms, extreme temperatures, and invasive species on these specific assets? If we have some that have gotten started, but I'll ask you guys to start talking. Anything? I'm not going to make the Bueller joke again. We already did that last time.
So Jenny, I know invasives has come up a number of times. It would be great, this isn't happening right now, it'd be great if there was some kind of mapping of invasives so we could prioritize, the most problematic and the most sensitive resource areas.
That's a great one.
And I would add to that for invasives that there be some kind of education to residents, either on the town's website somewhere or as a handout available somewhere about how to identify them, how to remove them.
Like Japanese knotweed, where if you weed whack it, it just makes it worse.
And I guess one mitigation strategy that we're trying, at least with orders of conditions, is trying to tell people that the fill that they bring in needs to be clean and composted so that they're not bringing in weed seeds, which tends to be a bit of a major issue with development.
That's a great, I'm going to put that under strengths when we reshuffle this at the end.
Jenny, it's Matt again. Another kind of strength to add into the order of conditions would be the Conservation Commission's doing a good job prohibiting the storage of fuels and other kind of undesirable liquids within the buffer zone in like a shed or something.
Great. Unhide the vulnerabilities that might help people sort of think about some of the things we've discussed and what we want to do about it. beyond what's been discussed.
Jenny,
So
I
on,
have,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, you go.
I have comments when you are ready.
I am ready.
Okay. Let's see. So I have Susan Thomas writes, the Conservation Trust has programs, and I think she's referring to a number of things. So there, she lists them. There's a stream team for water quality measurement. And then there's a mile a minute, which is an invasive weekly poll, and a water chestnut poll. I don't know how, I guess the mile a minute is weekly. I don't know how often the water chestnut happens.
We've been doing the last 3 summers.
Okay. So that's annual.
Yep, it's only when it's in growth can you really do it it's in the river. So.
Okay. And then Susan Thomas also writes this about citizen education about invasives. The NCRS has a good, sounds like education about invasives that she can share. And I don't know what NCRS stands for offhand.
Natural Conservation and Resource.
That's a state agency?
It was a federal agency.
Okay. And then another one from Susan. Homeowners need a way to determine if soil and loam is quote unquote clean. No labeling or regulation standard currently, so residents often get unwanted seeds, anaerobically or incompletely composted contents in their loam.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out where to put that. 1 second.
Mm.
I'm gonna put that. Ooh, it applies to a bunch. I'm gonna put this with wetlands. So,
Well, Jenny, I think it goes beyond the wetlands. Oh, the Conservation Commission, is trying to educate people through the condition when they approve things. But I think what Susan's adding is that it's really beyond just wetlands. It's kind of all landscape related stuff. People are bringing in landscape material, upland as well.
okay, let me make sure. I'll just put this in italics, and when we do kind of a final look and organization of the matrices, so we will make sure it's properly represented. So for tree cover, it sounds like one of the vulnerabilities was not having an active tree planting program. So a mitigation action would be developing some kind of a tree inventory and planting plan. And stop me if you don't like that.
Well, I guess I don't dislike that, but I would just add another detail, which is that some place we need to have an understanding of which tree species are best at climate sequestration and promote the planting of those and prevent the removal of those. I would say.
That's a great one, Rebecca. I don't know if I captured it completely, but. Are there any questions in the questions or in, sorry, it's hard for me to keep all this big enough to see and then.
So I just see vernal pools sticking up, and it's probably more a strength than I have for mitigation, but the state does have the layer for potential certified vernal pools, and it is on our GIS layers. So I would say it's sort of a strength that we have it available, and people can use it to also check, if they're looking to do work that might be near a potential vernal pool.
Great. I'm going to scroll back up so you can refresh your mind at the top. So we had the aquifers, and we had some discussion about education on lawn maintenance, septic systems, updating language, water department website. updating language in planning board to encourage native plantings. Conservation lands, actually these are all kind of strengths. So other than the education. Basically educating citizens about invasives, and that applies beyond conservation lands. Anything else on conservation lands that would be a mitigation action that you have in mind?
Well, maybe.
Susan, I think, oh, okay, go ahead, Rebecca.
Well, just along some of the lines that some of the other participants have added, just about how they can be used, maybe more public education about the impacts of use of motor vehicles or having dogs on conservation land. I know that there has been some activity around those things, but maybe more, maybe a different approach or a different forum or something.
Yeah, that was essentially going to be my comment. The dog walking, it hasn't been really made clear in the last year after we've received town council opinion that dogs have to be leashed on conservation land. I think that it's been a going educational thing, but it's not completely understood yet.
Maybe enforcement, greater enforcement would be a mitigation strategy.
You guys have a lot of time on your hands.
I know.
Yeah,
right?
I'm not sure that'll go over well with everyone. I think you know, the animal control officers have been great at helping to educate when they're out. I think maybe more. I have been interested in having more of a ranger type of position, not so much as enforcement, but education. You know, alongside of, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Would that ranger in his off time be able to do some of the work instead of creating work for other people?
Well, we'll have to see what we can get funded, right?
No, I'm just saying that it seems there's a lot of needs and not a lot on the other side of being able to accomplish a lot of things. So, you know, the existing resources are getting stretched. I just want to put that out there, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah. It has to be recognized. I mean, you know, if you have one lawnmower and it's being used to cut grass and it's used 5 days a week, people can't assume that because we have one lawnmower that we can do 10 times the work with that one lawnmower is what I'm saying.
Right. So maybe we put something in terms of capacity for a vulnerability, Jenny. I mean, maybe just in general.
Yep.
I'm just saying, if you create more work, if for every action there's an opposite reaction, and if that's causing more work, we need to try to balance some of the stuff. Is what I'm kind of coming at, you know.
That's a great one, and that's kind of a comment we'd end up putting not in the matrix, but it'll come into the report about balancing mitigation strategies with a town staff capacity and town funding.
So it's sort of an interesting thing that Chip and I have been dealing with is along those lines. You know, having all the conservation land is great, but we've also been finding an increase in requests for tree removal from these storms, the down trees that have happened from high winds and from development so close to the edges, and in some cases the open space with developments don't leave enough of a natural buffer, and so you get these thin strips of trees and then they fall into people's yards, and then it's creating a capacity issue where we're having to now put town resources into clean up areas that you know, it was meant to be a natural buffer, but now it's deteriorating into people's yards.
Right, and that gets exacerbated by the fact that Carol is very good at doing conservation land, but then there's also the Board of Selectmen land, the Water Department land, the Tree Forest land, the state lands that nobody takes care of. It's all coming as new work to us at the public works side of it, but we're not getting the resources to do any of the work.
I'm just going to chime in here for just a quick second. All this conversation is really great, which I appreciate it, and I don't mean to be rude, but I want us to make sure that we keep moving on task, looking across the board to make sure we're not missing stuff, because this is our opportunity to get projects on the board here for funding. And just want to make sure we don't dwell too long on one topic. I apologize for that.
No, that's a good comment, Gabby.
I'm done.
No, Tip, it's good. It's good to have those sentiments, especially in the report. But we also need to think about, this is the category that most, like going back to what I said, EEA's program is very focused on nature-based solution type projects. And so, Rebecca, when you had talked about like doing the tree inventory and then thinking about what trees might be more resilient to climate change that should be encouraged or strategically planted, that's kind of in that realm of thinking about nature-based solutions and preparing for climate change. So we have a chance here to keep thinking about projects that might be things that grant funding could help with in the future. So I like that Gab kind of re-steered it back to that, because we have some good ideas here, but I'm wondering if we were missing things that you guys have in your minds that might be in that sort of realm, if that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's all great conversation, so I apologize for my rudeness.
It's just the other part of the thing. I mean, we just got $15,000 from National Grid to plant trees. They look at me and say, Chip, you got $15,000. What kind of trees you're going to plant, where you're planting them, and when you're going to plant them? It's like, what are you talking about here?
Well, I have some comments from attendees when you're ready, Jenny.
I'm ready.
Okay. So I have one from Emily Teller, maybe putting dog/leash/conservation land in the information literature at the time of licensing at the town clerk would be another potential way to deal with education about dogs.
That's a great one.
Emily also notes that residents can do vernal pool certification.
Okay.
I think she's getting at the, getting volunteers, taking some of the volunteers, absorbing some of the capacity issues. She's asking if any of these tasks can come under Westford Academy students' community service work. Are there any other creative ways to spread out the responsibility, extend capacity? All right, another one from Susan Thomas. Maybe a priority placed on changing management, not adding it for the time being when resources are expected to be tight, or an emphasis on creating a position that seeks grant funds. The Fed and Commonwealth is putting more emphasis on these concerns, and for the time being, money through grants seems to be available.
Nope.
And then another, Emily says, and this I guess could be mitigation, these comments should go to town boards, planning, conservation, and ZBA, so they are proactive as they can be on all of these issues. Chip is 100% right on. New work, not additional people. This is a threat too, and that needs mitigation.
Great. Putting that in, that'll be a comment that sort of goes into the report, maybe not well, it is kind of a mitigation action, is education of municipal staff on sort of all these pro cons and sort of keeping the balance.
Yeah. And then Susan Thomas just mentions that scouts are looking for social distancing projects. So they won't be able to plan and do purchases, but they could help with labor potentially.
Where I live in Somerville, they had interns do the tree inventory, and that's a cool city. And then they had them use GIS, their cell phones with GIS apps, and they just, when they had time, they went out and it tracked how many hours they spent, and they got credit for the high school. And they basically took a photo of each tree and measurements, and I think some of them were able to identify the species, and I think there were some challenges with that, but.
Well, I wonder if there are any possibilities with Neshoba Tech. We talk a lot about Westford Academy, but what opportunities there are in Neshoba Tech for, help or interns, that kind of thing. And the other one would be like Minuteman, Minuteman Community College or University of Lowell or any of those places, if there are any.
Like Middlesex and Bedford and.
Or even just, I'm trying to think of the schools that are close-ish to Westford, where students might be interested in having a project, or there might be a biology student or a engineering student or somebody who might be interested in taking something on. I don't think there's been a whole lot of outreach.
So just mitigation would be doing outreach. Oh, let's just add that to your list, Rebecca.
Yep.
I know that the engineering department has had interns over the years in GIS and some other. I think they've had some intern support over the summer.
I think many we've all had interns, and they are great, but it does again take you do have to have the capacity to be able to take them on, because you have to get them up to speed on projects.
Oh, I totally understand that. Yep.
I've only had one intern in 15 years. They just cut it out of the budget years ago.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't mean paid intern. I meant our WA students.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've had those too.
Well, and I have a comment from Susan Thomas saying that she knows a currently unemployed college grad looking for volunteer work. She knows one with a degree in biology and chemistry or chemical engineering who's looking for work. Will refer. So, maybe the upside of this COVID thing is there might be more free labor out there. People looking for experience.
Well, we're down to about 15 minutes left, and I want to go back up to the top because I've been at the bottom kind of adding comments as they go. So we've definitely talked about aquifers and conservation lands. We talked about, we don't really have any mitigation actions about Stony Brook Conservation Land or East Boston Camps, floodplain. I don't know if there's anything for Forge Beach or Pond. I think you're already doing mitigation actions with the pond with respect to the Healthy Lakes and Ponds Collaborative and treating.
Can I just interrupt? I think that unless people really feel strongly about calling Stony Brook out, it's just one of many of our conservation lands. I think it doesn't have to be called out separately unless there's specific need for that.
No, that's a good point. In the community asset inventory, we list the conservation lands, but it can be a general comment in the matrix, and we can list some examples. So maybe when I reshuffle this, I'll do that. One of the comments I got on the survey was about connected open space. And we haven't talked a lot about specifically connected open space. We talked about walkability and we talked about all the trails. I didn't know if there was anything this group had on improving or maintaining connectivity for wildlife corridors and habitat, along with sort of trails and walkability.
I guess I would just say the open space and recreation plan does talk about that a little bit. That's always a goal. Whenever we're looking at development as well, we're looking at how it connects to systems, not just from a trail connectivity, but more of a large land mass to provide that. I think the other thing is just our rivers and streams are great corridors, and having the Stony Brook that cuts east-west is a huge asset in the town for that. And we do, work with neighboring communities as well. Littleton just recently reached out about a conservation restriction they were thinking of putting on their land, or land in Littleton, and how it might connect to some open space in Westford.
Oh, that's great. Okay. One of the other things that I think is important to get into this list, just because it really has only come up minorly, is undertaking stormwater retrofits as they're possible on both town projects and encouraging them on private projects. I know there's a lot of regulations there, but thinking about just making sure that gets into the list so that it continues to be eligible for funding. So I'm going to just take it upon myself to add that, if everyone's okay with that.
Go for it.
And then, are there any places that stream corridors need any kind of stabilization, or are there specific wetland sort of improvement areas that you'd want to list in here?
Well, there definitely are some places with erosion, and one of them's around Forge Pond, so it is town-owned conservation land, but it's also adjacent to a water body, and the same at Stony Brook. That gets a lot of heavy use. There are some areas of erosion down to Burgess Pond. Along the rivers, I'm not exactly sure. I think at one of our last sessions, we talked about dams. I mean, we talked about that as a thing of vulnerability. And
yep.
I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on the erosion issue. I do hear from people on Nabnasset Pond that a lot high wakeboarding and high motor activity has been causing erosion of the shoreline on the lake.
Okay.
I guess, Jenny, one other thing that and Paul would probably know that I've said this, but, there's definitely room for improvement at all of our, I shouldn't say all, but at a lot of the culvert crossings. There's places along roads that we're still doing. We have erosion of drainage into wetlands. We have some places where the old standard drainage is causing erosion. I can think of a spot on 110 in particular. So there's certainly infrastructure improvement to prevent erosion into wetlands and water bodies.
We're going to the selectmen on the 9th to request a contract amendment to advance the Route 110 widening project, which will include a stream crossing friendly culvert replacement at the Westford Regency, and then improvements to the other culverts on the 110.
Those are just my thoughts. Those areas, great.
Yep, and in the area between the Regency and the Powers Road. So hopefully we can advance that to be ready for any potential stimulus funds that come out for transportation improvement.
Awesome, that's great, Paul. What about the bridges, Paul? Is that anything that comes under this in terms of natural, with floodplain and flood disasters or anything that would be helpful?
What bridges?
Bridges, typically this program, specifically a bridge replacement under this program wouldn't be that, under the state's program wouldn't be that competitive for MVP, just because it's really an infrastructure thing. It would have to be coupled with a whole kind of stream corridor restoration and sizing for flooding under climate change. And you'd have to really work at that narrative to even have it be sort of considered. There are many other funding programs for the bridges, including Mass. So it's not a bad one to list, but it typically falls more under infrastructure and doesn't necessarily include nature-based solutions as heavily. So
does the purchase of land adjacent or floodplain fall into that? Like, would that be something as a strategy? Okay.
Yeah, do you remember if land acquisition is covered by the MVP grant? I think land acquisition is a great mitigation action, period, for flood mitigation.
Well, there's a cap on the grants, so that's something to consider. I honestly don't know. I'd have to go back in and look at it. It's not something that I've ever had an experience with or recall from a pilot project. Sorry about that.
No worries, but it is a good one to list.
Yeah, putting together an inventory of properties for purchase certainly is a good project. Any type of assessment or inventory is a great fit for MVP action plans for open space environmental assets.
Great. Well, we're getting close to noon. We're definitely going to end by noon. Let's take a few more moments of comments. For those of you who haven't spoken yet or have an additional question, can you type stuff in or raise your hand?
I don't see anything. I do have some comments, Jenny, from our audience.
Great.
Members. Okay, so one question from Emily Teller. Will power lines be put underground as part of the Route 110 widening that will mitigate trees falling on wires, which will reduce tree clearing?
Oh, okay. So let me see where I can put that one. So that's kind of under tree cover. Oh, you know what? Okay, hold on. Can you just read it one more time, Rebecca? Sorry.
Sure. Will power lines be put underground as part of the Route 110 widening project? And if they are, the underground power lines would mitigate trees falling on wires, which would in turn reduce tree clearing.
Yep, the question comes up, Paul Starrett, town engineer. The question comes up on every project. Unfortunately, it's $4 million a mile to add that, and it's a non-participating cost, meaning the town would have to pay for it. So it's the same thing, actually to be more than that on this project, but we looked at it for the Minot's Corner project, and the costs are astronomical. It would be a major impact on the cost of doing it. So unfortunately, we are not planning to bury the utilities on Littleton Road.
Okay.
We'd like to, but it's just way too expensive.
Yeah.
You know what, Rebecca? Some of the comments are coming in the chat, and because they're coming from folks that are in the attendee, and then some of them are coming in the questions. So one of the comments from Emily Sherbo was just Westford does have a high number of certified and protected vernal pools, which is a strength.
I think we hold the record. I think we hold the record in the state. I've heard at least one source.
We're number one. Ray had also reminded folks about the Healthy Lakes and Ponds Collaborative and the Stream Team. And then Emily had talked about Emily Sherbo, had talked about mitigation actions for all watersheds, water bodies, and aquifer, implementation of the Stormwater Management Master Plan for high quality and drainage benefits hinges on funding through the stormwater fee. And that's a good one to put in here because projects that are through that could possibly become eligible for MVP funding or other. And then Ray had also noted, should we include grant opportunities as mitigation actions? And I think we did kind of cover that in the idea of maybe having a grant person or coming up with a grant strategy. So that just is the comments that ended up in the chat and not the questions.
Okay, thanks, Jenny.
Yep. So any last questions, Rebecca, that you got?
I have one from Emily Teller asking, is sustainability and or green energy or plans a part of this?
Yes. Yeah, jump in if you want. The state MVP program does include thinking about alternative energy sources like microgrids.
Absolutely.
And,
That's new categories for them are energy, chemical use, pollution prevention.
So that, but we did kind of cover that, I thought, in the infrastructure session. I'll just put a note to check that.
Okay.
And then we're down to 3 minutes left. So what's any last ones?
Who would perform an inventory conservation land acquisition plan? I don't know the answer to that offhand.
Well, that was something that possibly could be fundable by a grant, and so you could have an outside contractor help with something like that with input from town staff possibly.
Okay. Another grant opportunity would be for putting buoys or other sorts of physical reminders, back to Carol's comment about erosion due to high-speed boats and things. So a grant to put buoys and other sort of physical reminders to keep speed down on our ponds.
Good. I'll put that. That's kind of a mitigation one, and if it was fundable by a grant, that would be great. All right, we're at 2 minutes left. I am gonna cut this off and just go to the last slide, if you guys are okay with that.
Yep.
We are at the end. Hold on, I'm having a problem with switching because I am bad at the internet. Okay. So we are at the end of these 4 sessions. There is going to be some last pieces for folks that have been participating as well as the core team. Typically when we're in person, we would go through a whole ranking and prioritization and voting process. So each table would have kind of ranked together and then presented to the group, and then the whole group in the workshop would have ranked to come up with the top mitigation strategies. And so we're doing that virtually instead. There's going to be a post-workshop survey. It should be coming out on Monday. So we're fast and furiously wrapping that up. Rebecca will be sharing it with the core team, as well as all stakeholders invited to the workshop, even if they didn't attend. There'll also be the draft findings community resilience building report, and that will be on the website early next week, and Rebecca will send that out. And I'm asking folks to review that before they attend the listening session, which is scheduled for 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Tuesday, June 18th. And it will be again through GoToWebinar. And with that, if you have questions, here's our contact information. And we really appreciate you all coming and spending an hour and a half today with us. Any last?
Can we have a 10, 9, 8, 7, 6 countdown here
and then break? You want me to do that, Paul?
No.
All right. Thank you all. We really appreciate your ongoing participation. You had some good ideas today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day, everybody.
Bye. Yes, hon.
Can you stop recording, Rebecca?
Yep, hold on 1 second. I have multiple things going on right now.
Oh, I think I can do it. Hold on. I did it. Did I?
Session is being recorded. If you don't want to record, stop showing screen. Nope, that's not it. Yes, I am still in my meeting. Well, this should not be so complicated. Honey, I can't talk to you about it right now. Can you give me 5 minutes, please?
Yeah, just say it. Yes or no.
No. Okay, that just stopped something. Or you're gone, Jenny, I guess.
I'm gone.
All
Well,
right.
my videos.
I'm sorry. I'm like, I have like.
No, you're fine.
Talk to me too, and Oh, I want to save the chat log and I want to save
Yeah.
question log. Oh my God. I did this before and I made it. Oh, stop recording. Okay, there we go. Jeez.
Here, I can copy the chat log. I don't know if we got the chats from the last ones. We had a lot more this time on chat than we have previously.
Yeah, I don't know that we've had much of anything on chat before, to be honest.
Not really. I think there were minor comments. This one was a heavy chat one for some reason.
Yeah, that was sort of strange to me.
I think some people weren't really listening, and then, oh boy, and then like Emily Sherbo, who I work with, she couldn't figure out how to unmute herself. It's like, just unmute yourself.
Uh-huh. I have no idea how to stop this from recording. I don't know why.
Usually I just click on it and it says like, stop recording.